All right. I apologize, everyone. I lost it. Now it's back. Okay. First of all, before we even start, I want to thank Carrie for putting this together and Tiffany for getting all our ducks in a row for tonight. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. This has been a long time in the making. The police reform. Actually, Carrie, if you can please just pull up the first slide and we'll start there. So hopefully everyone can see that, but I want to thank everyone for coming tonight as we deal with the first stage of the approval of our police reform and reinvention collaborative committee in terms of what we want to see changing here in Newcastle, and ultimately some issues that we want to see change far above us, either on the county or state level. This has been certainly a collaboration, to say the least, from people with diverse backgrounds in terms of ethnicity, diverse backgrounds in terms of their careers and experiences. So this has been pretty exciting for the town of Newcastle. And I thank Chief Carroll as well, Jill Shapiro, and everybody. But before we begin, just so everyone understands, this is not necessarily going to be a back and forth where you'll have questions and we'll answer, and we'll continue on that manner. On that way, it'll be more of us sharing what this is about, and then you can ask all the questions or bring up comments or have anything you want to us to potentially address or change or add to our recommendations. So with that said, Carrie, if you can flip to that next slide, please. On June 12th of last year, our governor, Andrew Cuomo, signed the New York State Executive Order 203, requiring local governments to adopt a policing reform plan by April 1st of this year. And in response to comply with that executive order, this is what we've done here in the town of Newcastle to address that. Have the next slide, please. In the town of Newcastle, our work on police reform began prior to the governor's executive order, and we were fortunate in launching our PRRCC, which is the abbreviation for this committee, to be able to build on a foundation of activities that started in the summer of 2020 with the creation of Newcastle Council on Race and Equity, and most people know it, at least locally, as a CRE. The CRE was formed in the aftermath of the police-involved murder of George Floyd, and also in response to a series of racist incidents in our community. The CRE created an action plan to increase racial justice and equity here in Newcastle by looking across all aspects of our civic life and institutions, including policing. The work of the CRE to develop recommendations to improve community police interactions was a launch pad for the PRRCC, and several CRE volunteers continued their services on this committee as well. In addition, the Newcastle Town Board held a community forum with Police Chief James Carroll to review police policies and procedures and to engage residents this past June. On Tuesday, October 20th of 2020, the town board approved a resolution creating the Newcastle Police Reform Reinvention Collaborative Committee, appointing 12 members. We expanded that committee to a larger number on Tuesday, November 17th, by appointing 7 additional members. If I could have the next slide, please. I don't need to read everyone's name, but I want to thank everyone because this really was a community effort. And I can't stress enough, even in our own group, we had different views. Everyone was able to share what their thoughts were. Sometimes we agreed, sometimes we didn't agree, but it was a really terrific way to move the ball forward on an important issue. So thank you for everyone for being involved. If I could have the next slide, please. And I won't go through all of our timeline, but you can see that we have met many times. We actually added some time to brought on another date because we took a long time to go through this, not because we were slow, but because we were methodical in addressing these issues. And you can see that we have today's date here on the 11th, when we're presenting to you the public. This is not the last day. We still have another review and for feedback, and then there'll be another third one as well before the town board in March 2nd will ultimately take the next step in addressing the ratification of those recommendations. Can I have the next slide, please? So generally, we can break down our recommendations, even though they're more vibrant than 7 particular areas, into these 7 places of mental health, office of the community advocate, Chiefs Advisory Board, community surveys, explaining the role and further of the town board, tracking demographics on traffic stops, and posting of key department policies on the website. So all of these collectively are far more than these just 7 particular areas, but those are the main focuses. And as any attorney will tell you, if there's one, there's a sub 1A, B, C, D, E. So everything has a different piece to it or component beyond what you're seeing here. And Carrie, if you can pass on to the next slide, please. So first dealing with the first recommendation, which deals with mental health. The recommendation statement is as follows: additional crisis intervention training for mental health emergencies, especially those in marginalized communities. The NCPD, which is the Newcastle Police Department, intervention with Newcastle community members experiencing mental health emergencies will be guided by the following principles: maintaining the health and safety of the person experiencing the mental health emergency and those in the immediate location, and approaching the situation with the goal of being as helpful as possible. That sounds pretty basic, but again, what we have seen, not necessarily here, but just across the US, there are times when people who are in a mental health crisis or have mental health issues unknown to a police officer or other first responder, things very quickly spiral out of control. So this is something that we felt was very important to address in our community. And I will add, when I'm done with all of these different slides, that's when I'll open up the floor if anyone has any questions or issues or comments to share. If I can have the next one, please. The next is the Office of the Community Advocate. And we went back and forth what we would call this, an ombudsman or something along those lines, but ultimately we chose community advocate. And the recommendation is as follows: the elimination of anonymous complaints and the establishment of the Office of the Community Advocate. And we, the PRRCC, acknowledge that anonymous complaints are problematic in that they allow a complainant to maintain anonymity when lodging a complaint, but fail to provide an avenue to allow the complainant follow-up and closure. They are problematic for the police as well. The anonymous nature of the complaint does not allow for follow-up by the police in order to construct an effective and thorough investigation, such as material information is missing. What would happen when that occurs? Things don't go anywhere, they go sideways. In lieu of an anonymous complaint, the town of Newcastle will create an independent office of a community advocate. And again, this is something that can help facilitate and bring resolution to whatever way it goes for both the person who has the issue and the public who complains, as well as internally with the police department, so they can rectify and address whatever problem occurred. Can I have the next slide, please? The next one is the Chief's Advisory Board, which is different than what we just shared, which was the Office of the Community Advocate. The Newcastle Police Department Chief's Advisory Board serves to improve the image and reputation of the Newcastle Police Department and promote transparency and trust between our department here and the citizens who reside here. And frankly, it's not just the citizens, but anyone who comes through town who might work here as well. The Chief's Advisory Board will consist of members of the community and organizations and should be actively engaged in improving the quality of life here in Newcastle. Board members should have an interest assisting the Chief of Police and our department in identifying best practices and offering advice to the Chief on those matters that will improve transparency and build trust within the community. Board members are asked to provide their perspectives on the possible impact of certain policies of the police department, their practices, training, and programs. This feedback is instrumental in providing the Newcastle Police Department with the type of objective input needed to ensure that this mission continues to focus on the most current policing standards and the implementation and continuation of programs, policies, or initiatives contrary to its overall mission and values. To be very clear, again, this is the advisory board is not to advise the public on how to file a complaint, for example, but to really efficiently and effectively help the police navigate best practices and in part be also a bond with the community for that purpose and allowing the community to understand, when we use the term transparency, not just as a word, how this process works, how we're going to move the ball forward, how we're going to make sure that what the community thinks is important within the four corners of the law is followed through upon. If I could have the next slide, please. The PRRCC, as it community surveys, The PRCC believes that periodic community surveys would be beneficial in tracking our goals, determining trends, and creating new goals vis-a-vis the interaction and relationships between the BIPOC, LGBTQ, and other marginalized communities and the police department. A useful and effective survey would gather basic data and information in order to identify areas for change or improvement, aid in determining the success of past strategies and highlighting the need for future actions and continuing to bring about racial equality, and enabling the information to be shared among the relevant groups for the review and then to use something and use that data for a valuable purpose. In order to accomplish this task, it is clear that surveys must be concise and specifically target the information being solicited from the public. For this reason, and to benefit the fullest extent possible, the PRCC has determined that a survey professional would be necessary to assist in creating, designing, and implementing the best surveys possible in order to extract the most essential information from the public. And I would just remind you, and this is something that we discussed internally as well, that the value of such a survey is only as good as the people who contribute and involve themselves in answering those questions honestly. So if we want to take this task and move it in the right direction, it's imperative that the community also respond and get involved in that survey so that information is current and accurate. If we could have the next slide, please. Recommendation 5 is the role of the town board. The PRCC finds that improvements in the police oversight can benefit the community and the police department itself. Increased cooperation between the community and the police department and heightened transparency regarding police practices and processes will advance the Newcastle Police Department's goal of engaging in community policing. One way to increase this oversight is by strengthening the role of the town board in reviewing our police department's performance. As elected officials, town board members are committed to ensuring that the Newcastle Police Department is accountable to the community. As civilians, the board can give a voice to the community's concerns. In addition, as police commissioners, which your town board acts as police commissioners during their tenure, the town board is engaged in reviewing the details of investigations and disciplinary proceedings. What is the recommendation? Hold semi-annual audit review meetings with the Newcastle Police Chief to review departmental performance. And what we recommend is that the Newcastle Police Department develop key performance indicators for that department for publication on the town website. Using this as a framework, we recommend holding a semi-annual meeting between the town board and the police chief to review departmental performance and discuss activity over the past 6 months. Through these public meetings, the town board can help educate the community about the responsibility of the Newcastle Police Department and to increase the public's understanding of law enforcement policies and procedures. And I would remind, we're hearing sort of the same things over and over, which is this touches on transparency too, and this touches on communication. And the more that it's visible to the public, and the more that there's communication, the better the police department will be, the better our interactions will be. And I would also just add, in terms of this role with the town board, there are limits, because if there is something that's disciplinary in nature, the town board may sit in judgment at some point, and there are means, or pardon me, there are certain things that we have to do and deal with in time, meaning that we can't be arbiters of something and take all the evidence of a potential issue at time one. There's certain times at the end of the investigatory process that it may come to the town board. I don't know if that was very clear, but it's not as if the police department, police chief would come to us and just give us all the information at once. There's certain stages before it would reach the town board. And then ultimately, if necessary, we adjudicated a particular issue. If I can have the next slide, please. Tracking demographics on traffic stops. And this is very important. And this is something that we saw the import of to this community and beyond, because even if we do it here, we really need this on a much larger level, whether that's the county or on the state level. Recommendation statement. The PRCC seeks to obtain demographic information regarding the drivers involved in vehicle stops in Newcastle by our police officers that do not result in the issuance of traffic tickets. We seek to gather information to gauge the officer's perception, and that's critical. It's their perception, not how someone identifies. It's the perception of the police officer, so we can understand or try to make way with the data that we receive as to why certain trends are occurring or not occurring. But these perceptions include race, gender, age, and ethnicity. Based upon the research conducted by the committee, contained in the background document entitled Traffic Stop Data Collection, we believe that the Chiefs Advisory Board is in the best position to determine the method of data collection. We expect that this board would use these studies as a guide to engage consultants to determine the process of data collection and the analysis of that data. And one other thing I want to share for those who are not aware, obviously we know that the sawmill touches our municipality and other state and county roads. There are not just the Newcastle Police Department that manages and protects this community, but it's the county police. And in some instances on the Taconic, for example, we have troopers, which are the state police. So there's many different agencies, not just the Newcastle Police Department, that impact our lives or involve themselves in our protection and policing. If I could have the next slide, please. Recommendation 7, posting of key departmental policies on the website. The table of contents will be posted on the website, and specific chapters will be available. The general public may foil any section of the control manual for review. And this again goes back to transparency and ease of access of information, because the more you know, or the more you have access to, the more or the better place you'll be personally, as well as the police department, so that we're all on equal footing. The next slide, please. Looks like that's empty. And I have not much to say about an empty slide. So in substance, this is really a really squeezed down, small, tight version of what we've done. And I can assure you, as can everyone else here, that we've had a heck of a lot more conversations and back and forth than just what you're seeing on these pages. So I encourage people to ask questions or have comments, and hopefully you've had a chance to see some of the materials. Again, it won't be as much back and forth, but if we have time, we certainly can do so. And there's no bad question, there's no bad comment. And I thank everyone here, and I certainly thank Chief Carroll. This by no means was an attack on the police department, saying that we don't like you, you've done everything bad. This is a genuine effort to look at how we're doing things in Newcastle, seeing how we can improve them, seeing how we can avoid some of the mistakes, whether it's 1% of the time or less or more. And then, as some people have said on the committee, and I think we would all agree, there's things that we can do that the county and state can take advantage of as well and be the leaders, because doing it solely in Newcastle is not the answer. With that said, if anyone has a comment they'd like to make on the committee, on the board, before I give it out to the public, please, by all means, share. So if there's anyone who'd like to mention anything or say anything, please feel free to do so.
You can raise your digital hand and I would open up your microphone so you can speak, if anyone's interested. There is a comment in the chat box.
I can read that comment. It's J. Chase Tyler III, to all of us. I don't think that the mental health recommendations go far enough in addressing the root problems involved with police responding to mental health calls. A good guy with a gun, for lack of a better term, is not a good way to address a mental health emergency. Having been on the other end of mental health emergencies calls, cops are for, pardon me as I scroll down, I apologize. Cops are for the most the best people to be the first responders in a situation where a mental health emergency is happening. Ideally, we could diversify the roles of first responders in general, but from a mental health perspective, I think this would be the best course of action. First, no lethal weapons should be brought into the situation unless every single attempt at de-escalation has failed. Secondly, cops shouldn't need additional training for de-escalation, and they shouldn't be the first responders entering a mental health crisis situation. Ideally, it would be social workers trained in de-escalation tactics who would be going into these situations first. And I think that, again, without the back and forth, I think that is something that this committee was concerned about, that we did want access to social workers. We did want access to mental health professionals. Could it be someone local? Could it be someone on call? Does it have to come through the county? So this is something absolutely that we've been concerned about and want to address. Looks like you've gone on to type a little bit more. Cops should only serve as backup for social workers. So again, these are issues, and I can encourage you to send something in. And let me ask Jill, for a public comment, is this going to be added to a record of how are we going to deal with what's been typed in?
Carrie, is there a way for us to preserve what's in the chat?
I believe it does export at the end. So
Okay,
I'll save it.
that's great. I just to the person who was kind enough to type all that in, I just want to make sure that you've had an opportunity to look at the entire recommendation on mental health and not just the little snippet, the little overview that Jeremy read this evening. The entire recommendation for the police department and for us involving mental health professionals on these calls is contained. It's on the website, and it's about 4 pages, Vince, would you say 3-4 pages of recommendations? Maybe you could speak to it a little bit, Vince, and go into a little bit more detail.
Yeah. So the comments cover a lot of what we discussed. The idea that de-escalation is the first part of it. There are some resources within our police department around de-escalation already. There are some highly trained police officers in that regard, and want to take advantage of the strengths that we have. There's also the idea, and this is kind of a proto idea. First, there is a need on the part of the county to provide some support in this way. There are some, I think, Jill, you talked about the idea of having stations where around the county where there could be a call to them to help in a mental health crisis. But then we also talked about having something or exploring something akin to a volunteer mental health, I don't know if you'd call it a brigade, but a committee where police could call somebody on call. And I'll just speak for myself, like myself, who work with autistic children, and be able to come and do exactly what the comment says, which is calm everything down, which is really what any social worker in crisis intervention would do, is calm everything down. So we did try and explore these kinds of things. Like all these recommendations, there's a lot of unpacking. And if we were to build in to our recommendations some of the thoughts that are represented here, I think it would just strengthen what we've already done.
Thank you, Vince. I would say what you said is completely fair, Vince. So please, by all means, read the materials. It's far more in depth than what I shared here and what we put up on the screen. And if you have comments, if you're concerned that we may not be able to preserve them, although it sounds like we are, I encourage you to send an email as well. And you can send that to make sure that everything that you have questions about or comments about is preserved.
Right. The email would be policereform@mynewcastle.org.
And if I could add that currently the officers do have the opportunity to virtually contact a mental health professional on cases like this. So
and that's by way of the county, Chief?
It's through the department from the county. Yes, we have a liaison that we can call 24/7.
Thank you, Chief. Okay, from Jen Klein. I'm wondering if there are mental health professionals either employed by the Newcastle Police Department or on the committee to assist in the training about mental health issues. So, I think that's a fair thing. And Vince just mentioned before, use the term brigade, whether it's a brigade or whether it's local people or whether it's from the county or from the state. We need to have other avenues to get mental health professionals to advocate for people when they need, to de-escalate situations when it's needed, and help with the police department understand how to deal with these situations. So again, I encourage you, Jen, to read. I know you're a mental health professional yourself. I encourage you to read the full scope if you haven't done so already. Thank you. I won't read Ivy's, but I will say that Ivy reminds everyone you can raise your hand. You can also just talk to us. You don't need to type. If it's more comfortable, you want to engage us, you can certainly speak to us. We'll call you in and invite you to speak.
If any of the people that called in on the phone, if they want to raise their hand to speak, dial *9, and then I can open their line.
Jen continued, and also how perceptions and understanding about mental health behavioral manifestations intersects with bias around race. Ivy shared with everyone the link. So if you are on, you should cut and paste it and save it and preserve it so you have it for later if necessary, if you can't look now. And this will be, just to remind everyone, it's shared through Ivy's supervisor report, or pardon me, on her e-newsletter. You can find it on Facebook. So we'll make sure that this is always out there and available for the public. The more you comment, the better it is for us. So I don't think there's, pardon me, sorry. Joe Chakota, I hope I'm saying your name right. What stops the police department from recruiting volunteer community officers? So, I think that's a good question, a good comment. It's something that I think we have some time because there's not that many people have engaged. So, Chief, do we have a volunteer like auxiliary police department they do in New York City, for example?
We do not have an auxiliary police department, nor have we ever. We haven't even actually explored it.
Okay.
I'm not sure that any police department in Westchester does at this point. Maybe the county for summers they get additional help, but Mount Kisco had one for a while and they're long gone. But I'm not familiar with anyone doing it.
Are you aware of any impediments, or it's just not something that has been done?
Well, I mean, it's an extensive amount of training, and there would have to be background, 6 months of training, field training. I just it's a profession, in my opinion, that needs full-time attention to become capable and competent. I don't know that it's something that should be done as a volunteer. I'm not against maybe like neighborhood watches or something like that. Maybe that's something we could look, with my chief's advisory board going forward.
So comments like this are very helpful. And I don't want anyone to think, and this is something that we dealt with internally as well, just because maybe it's not economical or just because there might be an issue with the law as it stands now, no comment is bad or wrong. If it can't happen, we'll cross that bridge if it can't happen. If it doesn't ultimately seem to fit the goal, then it doesn't fit the goal. But the ask or the comment, that's what we want. We want that, whether or not it ultimately comes to fruition.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Can I ask a follow-up question about that? Because I've never heard of this before. I guess I've never lived in a community that had volunteer community officers. I'd just be interested to hear from the chief or whomever. How do communities use volunteer officers, and what is the purpose of that?
I'm not familiar with communities that do. I know, up in Dutchess, they have the sheriff's office that have part-time deputies, but they're actually paid part-time employees. But I'm not familiar with volunteer community officers.
Some communities use auxiliary officers for parades, traffic control, that sort of thing. They don't carry guns. One of the chiefs in another village said they used to have a force, but they disbanded it. In part due to liability issues. So,
Harvey, are you familiar with anybody who has it now anymore? I know that was a thing in the past, but I don't even know anymore.
I don't know of any offhand in Westchester.
And what I might add, just for administrative purposes, just so we can share who we are. And I didn't speak and say Jeremy Slam when I started, but Harvey Loeb was just speaking. Everyone knows or should know Police Chief Jim Carroll, and everyone knows or should know Ivy Poole, the town supervisor. So thank you, Harvey.
I think New York City, actually has a volunteer auxiliary police force that does some patrolling throughout the city. I'm just not aware of in Westchester, but I believe it is available in New York City and used.
Yeah, there definitely is an auxiliary police force in New York City.
Can I is it okay to ask is it Joe Chakota to comment more about what's the concept there, what are they trying to get at? What would be helpful about doing that? Expand on the idea if that's possible.
Right, and you can do so now. If you don't want to do it now, you can just share it with us online via email later, whatever works for you.
I just opened up Joe's line. If just unmute yourself and we should be able to hear you.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, so the way I look at things, I think if you live local, you do things mindful that, you know, you got to do it right. If you live outside, like, I'm not complaining about the police. If you live outside, you can do stuff, and knowing at the end of the day, you'll be out of the community anyway, you'll be gone. That's just the view. Then some of the specifics are that, I mean, I have friends that I've actually called the police on me. I lived in town for nearly 15 years. This is a friend who, if everyone remembers, D'Agostino, I was coming out of D'Agostino, this friend was going in, I said hi. She rushed in to call the police simply because I didn't look like her. I mean, this is a friend, you know, I rushed in to say, what's the matter? I mean, it took her a long time to realize it was me, and then she apologized. Then this happened again way back. My daughter was in the soccer team on Hardscrabble Lake. I went to pick up the soccer team when she joined. The mother was screaming at the door. She wouldn't let me in. I went to pick up my soccer kids for my daughter. My wife had just spoken to her. She wouldn't let me in. So it's things like that which are like, you know, people, I mean, there are racial interactions even among us parents, not just students. These things go on all the time. So I thought that community policing may be a way to de-escalate and deal with some of these issues. And I have, in the neighborhood just last year, one of the neighbors was, I heard them scream on the kids' heads saying, you know, all Blacks should bow down and pay homage to slaves. This is last year, 2020, okay? If I called the police, would anybody else believe me? You know, things like the things that happen in the community every day, which you don't need to call the police. You probably need somebody who can actually pay attention, knowing that, you know, things can be de-escalated, dealt with in more detail. But somebody who lives local, because they may understand the community we live in better and what's going on than somebody who comes to work in the morning, at the end of the day, they're gone. I'm not complaining at the police, but I think having somebody local, they may interact more with the community, understand the dynamics, and be able to deal with the issue of rest a lot more deeper than just, you know, doing it as a duty that, you know, where they come for 8 hours and they leave at the end of the shift.
Thank you, Joe. I appreciate the comment. Did I also understand, and maybe I didn't, were you also looking for someone who, or people who are not police officers? Is that to help de-escalate, who are not necessarily social workers, but just people in the community who wouldn't be the police?
Well, I mean, that's probably somebody who worked for the police and lived local, they understand the community a lot better.
Okay.
I mean, one of the things I had in mind is that why doesn't town, subsidize police officers' accommodation so they can live local?
To help them live, you're trying to help them reside here.
Yeah. I mean, we pay enough tax.
Why doesn't the town create more workforce housing that would allow for our local public servants to be able to live locally as well?
Yep, that's the question.
That's one of our other issues. So Joe, it's a very fair and reasonable point. And that's one of the things, not necessarily with this committee here, but on a bigger scale with the town board and others who have been involved in that process to allow for workforce housing and affordable housing and different issues. But yes, that's one of our important goals. Thank you, Joe.
I feel like there's what he's raising though is it's such a powerful story, and I think it's really important for us to recognize that what he's talking about in terms of the community response to racial incidents. I think maybe those committee members who have been working with the CRE and are continuing to work with the CRE, maybe we can kind of take that back as something to, you know, continue to think about as how do we do that kind of community-wide training about intervention and support.
This is Joanna. I'm just gonna step in for the CRE. This was one of my objectives. And Joe, what I want to add and tell you is that we have something called neighborhood pods, which would go back to what you're asking about. So that is something we are working on, that whole idea. And it should help with your question. Once we have it figured out, we will be able to share it with the general public. So hold on a little bit, and it's something we are already considering and working on.
Thank you, Joanna. All right, so I think the next thing that came up here was from Ivy. On Tuesday, Westchester County released the Westchester County Police Reform and Reimagining Task Force Issues Report and Recommendations, which is now before the Board of Legislatures for approval. Legislators, probably not legislatures. She shared the link, so again, you can copy that link if you'd like and look through there. Michael Weinberg, would that be peace officers? And I think you may be responding to maybe what Harvey had mentioned a little while ago. But yeah, I mean, there's a difference between a peace officer and a police officer. And why don't we just really quickly, Chief, you want to just explain if you know the difference between a police officer and a peace officer?
Geez, I'd have to go back to my CPL.
Well, you don't have to go to the technical, but
yeah, corrections
don't have the
officers
same-
are peace officers. Constables are peace officers. They don't have the same rights or abilities as police officers do throughout the state for enforcing laws, et cetera. So sheriff's department are both peace officers and police officers, and any police department has police officers. So it's just like a little lower level, if you would.
Chief, I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
It's okay.
All right. From Victoria Azapidi. Hi, mental health. Are anxious panic responses that may look like the guilty reaction considered in the proposal? Perhaps training to recognize anxiety reactions, responses to police interventions stops, question mark, to raise awareness, think anxiety before escalating or assuming guilt. And the role of race in these dynamics based on BIPOC police history, generally speaking, not necessarily in the town of Newcastle. So did we go into that level of how someone may react? I don't know if we looked at it that way, Vince. You would probably, that's.
Yeah, we didn't get down to that granular level. I think I appreciate the comment because that elucidates an important aspect of what the mental health and de-escalation training is really all about. So in the proposal, we didn't go like de-escalation training and define it, and it covers these areas. I like the comment to make sure that it does get covered. And I appreciate that these different perspectives because it just fills out all the things we need to pay attention to.
Yeah, there are certainly things out of our respective wheelhouses. I can't profess to be a mental health professional by any stretch. So some of the comments are just to get the training and further that training, as opposed to saying specific, as has been said, in a granular level, particular issues.
But it may mean that just because there's a couple of these comments about mental health that have arisen, it may be important at some point as we move into operationalizing this proposal to put out some information about what the de-escalation training that we're doing covers, because there seems to be a lot of interest. And not only that, then if something important to a community member or some insight that they have that we're not covering, it would help identify it, because it's covers a lot of different kinds of situations.
That it does. It absolutely does. Any more comments, any questions, any concerns, any ideas? Again, there's nothing bad or good.
I think you actually have a hand that's raised right now.
So I'm opening the line for Maurice. I'm sorry, I can't see your last name.
Pepper.
There you go.
Yeah, most of these situations deal with who gets there first, because the first contact with any person who's in trouble makes the association that's going to deal with the whole procedure. What happens then, if they are a trained personnel that deals with mental problems, then they'll know what to do. If they're regular police officers, well, regular police officers don't go to medical school, and they don't go to psychologist school, and they're not trained to really deal with that. We can get, this guy drags out a knife or a gun, it's a different situation. All these things happen fast, very fast. And you don't have time to call up somebody else. So when it gets reported to the people that there is a situation, you have to be able to determine who you send out. And I don't know if you have that set up.
Well, one of the things we did discuss, one of the issues that was raised is, even if you have someone on call on the county, where is that person staging from? Where are they coming from? How are they going to respond? How many should be assigned to a particular region or a particular municipality? Should the municipalities have their own people in place? So some of it, I use the term, is above our pay grade, meaning there's costs and expenses and things like that. But these are an issue of concern for us: is how do you get access and immediate? If someone's down in Yonkers, but this happens all the way up in Somers, the time you get there, that mental health professional is going to be too late. So it absolutely is a concern to make sure the first person there also can handle if there's a dangerous situation, which would require the police officer, but also if there's a mental health situation that doesn't necessarily escalate to that violent level.
And Jeremy, if you recall, one of the things that we talked about, and Vince referenced it earlier, was the fact that, we were seeking assistance from the county.
Yes.
To help us create these locally, strategically located pods so that people were in close proximity. So you're not talking about 25 minutes to get from one spot to another. But, one of the wonderful things about living here is the space and, and the open green area. But the downside of that is to get just within Newcastle, from the west end of town to the east side of town, takes you 25 minutes.
Right.
And so that initial response time, and Mr. Tepper, I think it's Dr. Tepper, isn't it?
Yes.
Thought so. Though that's critical. And he's right. I mean, who's there first? So, I mean, I am reassured by the fact that our police department does experience, is trained in these de-escalation, methods and technology, and techniques. But at the end of the day, he's right. They're not all doctors. They're not all going to be certified mental health professionals. And so it's basically to just, keep the situation under control until, skilled help can come. But that's what we want to make sure, that skilled help is coming to assist. And that's really what we're looking for the county to help us out with.
And to your point, Jill, it's interesting because, as you say, our municipality is so large. If you were on the west end, would it be quicker if someone was housed in Ossining and that was their base point? Because that's literally jumping over, as opposed to the 20 minutes to come or 25 minutes to come from our police department that's in the hamlet of Chappaqua. They're closer to Ossining. So there's a lot of work, but that's an important issue for us to figure out and get help from the county and above to make it happen.
Right. And actually the far west end of town for fire services is serviced by Mid-Hudson, formerly OVAC, because it just was too far for our first responders to show up there. So.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Tepper.
Okay, we do have
Howard,
another.
Mr. Tyler?
Yeah, hold on one moment. Okay, you should be able to speak.
I'm unmuted. Everyone can hear me? Awesome. So I had a whole spiel prepared, but Dr. Tepper really summed it up well. So I'm just going to bounce off that really quickly. Perhaps it would be best to have a team of 4 people respond to mental health emergencies, where 2 social workers would make the first contact, right? And then begin the de-escalation tactics, and then have 2 cops serve as sort of backup if and only if de-escalation sort of fails. You know what I mean? Just to be completely safe about it, have social workers go in first, and then cops if and only, if violence is kind of needed.
Yeah, I listen, anything, as I said before, is a good comment and question. I'm not, despite having 20 years as prosecutor and criminal defense attorney, I'm not in the field. We need social workers. I don't think anyone here would disagree. We need mental health assistance. Whether or not someone's a danger and police need to arrive first, and then social workers. I don't know. I'm not in that place to say, but that type of thought absolutely is something that we're looking at, because we don't want things to go up. We want things to go down and level out.
I completely agree. And then I have another thing about education. So as far as I understand it, as things are right now, you can literally go into the police academy right out of high school. Chief Carroll, is that a fair representation of what the situation is, or not really?
You can't start the academy before 20 years of age.
Okay, but there's like no like requirement for like any kind of college degree, is there?
In Westchester County, there currently is not.
Okay, so I would if I could have my way, there would be a requirement for a 4-year bachelor's degree, and then on top of that, 2 years at the police academy, which would be the equivalent of some sort of like professional master's degree. So that way you have 6 years of higher education before you set foot out there as a cop. I think that would be far superior to the system we have right now.
And it's important to know that this committee, the main task of this committee, just so you understand, is for your local municipality. That's what the governor's executive order was. So we wouldn't be able to dictate that you have to have a college degree to enroll in the police academy. That would have to presumably be a countywide from the legislature, Westchester County legislature, or the state of New York to make that sort of requirement. Just so you can understand, I'm not neither here nor there in terms of me taking a position on that, but just to understand this is for our municipality, and something like that would certainly have to come from a higher authority.
Well, perhaps we could recommend this to the governor then. I mean, that's where these recommendations go at the end of the day, right?
Right. So any recommendation, please share any recommendation you have. I'm not here saying good, bad, or indifferent. So please,
Your bachelor's degree, 2 years at the police academy. That's what my recommendation would be.
Thank you.
And yeah, that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Tyler. I think we may have gotten some more pop-ups on the chat. Pardon me. Trying to navigate this. All right. It looks like Melissa Cintron may be the next thing that I saw. In light of the events at the Capitol, and even here before the holidays, when we had many outsiders come into town to demonstrate, are we looking into how to handle large crowds and potentially violent demonstrations? Many residents were fearful when large crowds showed up on Route 117 blocking traffic. I believe we need to plan ahead and take these threats seriously. I won't speak for Chief Carroll, but I know that Chief, you've told us in the town board that you work with the Secret Service, you work with other neighboring municipalities. There is mutual aid. So maybe you can just briefly explain some of that.
Sure. Yep. We on those events we coordinated with the state police, the Secret Service, and we also put the county-wide mutual aid agreement into effect, where every other municipality within Westchester had officers willing and able to respond depending on how the situation went, whether it went up or down, escalated or de-escalated. In addition, we've come up with some plans for some things we want to tweak, maybe get some messages out about staying away from the area, some information about, during that incident that, to document any crimes or videotape any crimes or take pictures of it that you could, we can follow up with afterwards, because we're just so tied up with the actual crowds and the incident at that time that we don't have the manpower to do further at that point. Additionally, the Westchester Chiefs have gotten together, and we are going to institute additional demonstration training and the ability to handle it through all police departments. And we're going to have rapid response teams with, say, 5 to 10 officers trained in each department in additional techniques and the ability to handle these things and be able to respond in a moment's notice to these kind of incidents. So it's something that we've, as a county and locally, have been dealing with and are working to improve.
Thank you, Chief. It looks like I inadvertently skipped somebody. Lorraine Burton, there was a question about the use of body cameras here in Newcastle. Chief, I'll just do briefly. Do we have body cameras right now?
We don't currently, but as part of this committee, I believe one of the recommendations that we did say at the end was to the state that we were suggesting that they fund a body cam program, and we would certainly look into that if and when they do.
Yeah, I think the consensus was with, and I hope I'm speaking fairly, that the committee would want that it protects everyone, for lack of a better term. It protects the person who's being arrested or accused. It protects the police officer. It preserves a record, if you will, as to what did or didn't happen. Right now, I know there's a fiscal or financial issue with them, among other things, but it's absolutely part of our recommendations and something fair to raise. So thank you very much. Looks like we have some hands up, Carrie, again.
Sure. This is for Nicole Richey.
Nicole, are you on or not yet? No.
There we go.
No, did we lose her or is she? Oh, there she is.
Oh,
Nicole, are you on?
you just have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I'm unmuted now.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll just keep my comments brief, but I just wanted to say that I agree with the last two speakers. I think what they said was very important. The first one being about having, it's important who the first person is who arrives at a scene. Certainly if it's a combative situation, you would need the police. But if it's not combative, I think it's, and I understand the logistics of this is very difficult, as you were all saying, but I think that's really important. And the second thing is regarding education. I actually taught in a law enforcement academy of high school students, and I would have to say I did not think that they were prepared to become police officers. So I think definitely more education is necessary as a prerequisite for getting into the police academy. That's it.
Thank you, Nicole. Looks like Mr. Tyler want to make another comment. Carrie, you want to bring him in?
Yeah, sorry. Just about the body camera point. Would it be a good idea to make body cameras that cannot be turned off while the police officer is on patrol? Like, is that just something in my crazy head, or is that like an actual thing that we could do?
Well, you know, I don't think anything's crazy in your crazy head. I can't comment on that. What I would say is ultimately, you know, I mean, there'd be likely a policy. What that policy is, I don't know because we haven't done it. But I can speak from my experience in the police department in New York City. They're not always on for whatever reason. Sometimes they're on, sometimes they're off. But the camera issue is something absolutely 100% we're looking into, and we would want guidance and assistance from the county and state. But we want to make it work.
Yeah, perhaps this could be tackled like more at the manufacturing level, where there just isn't an off switch. You know, because oftentimes when things like this are talked about, like on the news and stuff like that, it's portrayed as a matter of, oh, the police officer turned the body camera off. Well, if there's no off switch or no way for the individual officer to turn the camera off, then this kind of problem will decrease, right?
You know, it's a good question. Whether that's practical, whether that's something that would happen, I don't know the answer, but it's a question that I understand your point.
Awesome, thanks.
Thank you. Any other hands popping up anywhere? Anyone on the committee or otherwise want to share anything or comments? Oh, Hermione, one of us, hands up. Hermione's got her hand up. All right.
Hi. I did want to comment that one of the things we had discussed on the committee was actually having an independent 211 number that was not routed to the police, but in fact routed to a special social work unit as discussed. And a cost was a major deterrent in that matter. And then we started discussing pods within the county. But I think best practices really call for pods that where, unlike a 911 call, it's not routed to the police. Just in terms of the mental health aspect and police responding to that.
Hermione, did we envision, refresh my recollection, did we envision this still being a county-wide network, or did we envision it being local? Just refresh my memory. I remember talking about it and the details are escaping me.
I believe it's still as part of our recommendations to the county.
Yes.
Okay,
But,
we have to make sure
but
that
the- it
that's there.
No, but it was somewhat of a hybrid. It definitely is at the county level, but with the local regional offices, if you will. The pods would be
That's right.
the local, you know, the like the 3 villages, you know, 2 other villages surrounding us, that type of thing. So it was kind of like a hybrid, although it was the cost was basically through the county.
Right. So but it's a response. So depending upon where you called from, your call got routed to the closest pod for response.
Right.
Can I just say a word about 211
Yes.
in New York State? Because I see a couple of people asking questions about this in the chat feature. So 211 as a phone number has been around for about 20 years now, and different areas of the state have different nonprofit organizations that are responsible for staffing and maintaining 211. They apply for the license to be able to do so. In New York City, 211 is actually a part of New York City government. It is a part of the 311 structure. In Westchester County, I believe that 211 is run by United Way here locally, and still exists. So that is a number you can call today, and you will be routed to the United Way. And 211 is meant to provide sort of referral and information around health and human services generally, and mental health specifically as well. And so the issue that we talked about as a part of this committee was how and when could we refer people who call our police desk to 211 or to other sort of direct service providers who are, you know, part of the nonprofit network that serves Westchester County.
Thank you, Ivy.
For all intents and purposes, if 211 is not available to us, it could be 611 or 711. It's, you know, it doesn't, if it's by the United Way and we do not have access to it, we're not bound to that number, right? And Kimberly.
Oh, no, we do have access to it. So I think that the question is just how can we refer people to that? And can we, if they call our desk, can we route them directly, or do we, you know, have that as a number that, and you know, sort of one of the responses that we're providing to people in real time as they're calling us, and or how can we increase awareness of that, you know, number to people here locally? But they do serve our community.
They do. Okay, thank you. I misunderstood that.
But do they respond in emergency situations? Like, will they go out in the middle of the night when someone's having a crisis, or it's just for general?
Nope, it's information and referral.
Information and referral. Okay. Yeah. So it isn't exactly what we're looking for, but it's good to know that it's a resource. Okay.
And this is why we need buy-in from not just our town, we need buy-in far above us. The economics of it, the staffing of it.
I'm confident that if it existed, it would be heavily utilized. But it, you know, it's hard to prove a negative. It doesn't exist, so it's not used. So.
All right. Any other questions? Please feel free to raise your hand, shoot us a text, a message.
There was one comment in here, Jeremy.
Please go ahead if I missed it, because I've been kind of running through and I've been scrolling.
About, it was from Michael Weinberg, who said, could we only hire police officers that had four-year degrees for Newcastle? And that, I guess, raised the question about, well, what is our standard for how we hire the police officers? What are we looking for? But that was the comment in there.
I mean, we certainly could do that. But, you know, I've always hired what I felt myself and my hiring committee felt is the best, most qualified candidate, regardless of, you know, race, religion, sexual orientation, education. And I've said I do have officers with a high school degree that are excellent, and I have officers with a master's degree that's excellent. So we, you know, and higher education doesn't necessarily make them a good or great cop, or doesn't make them a bad cop. Sometimes it's the individual, and common sense does go a long way.
I think it's a maturity level that Mr. Tyler was sort of getting at initially.
Yeah.
That I think he was, he was looking for. I hate to put words in his mouth.
Yeah, and he did say that 2 years in the academy. And I know one of our recommendations to the state was additional mental health training in the academy and additional training in the academy. So,
Chief, could you very briefly, you don't have to go into great detail, but just explain your hiring process. And I would just add before you do that, that residents understand that ultimately you make your decision, but it comes to the sitting town board as police commissioners to really make that decision, the final decision.
Sure. We maintain a pool of resumes, and in anticipation of vacancies, we'll call in anywhere from 5 to 10 based upon our review of their resume and their qualifications, and whether or not we get resumes, but they're actually not able to become police officers in Newcastle. They might be on the city and not on a Westchester County list. They may not have the proper qualifications. They may not have enough time on the job. And we take that group and they're interviewed by all three of myself and my lieutenant and my detective sergeant. After that interview, each candidate's rated. We discuss it afterwards. We come up with the person we believe is the best candidate. We do a thorough background investigation on them. After that background investigation, if that's passed and meets our criteria, I will refer them to the town board and recommend them for hire. The town board then does an interview of the candidates and decides whether or not to offer them a job. After that point, they are submitted to a psychological exam and a medical exam. And after all that, if that all goes through, then they're ultimately hired by the department. And then they would start our field training program.
Thank you, Chief.
Can I just respond to what Vince mentioned about the 4-year degree? Yesterday, I was another committee I'm on. This sort of came up, and one of the officers said that would prevent hiring people right out of the military. You may have a very good candidate who does his military service 3 or 4 years and wants to become a police officer, and that person is trained in a lot of what a police officer does already, and they know about the chain of command. They're presumably going to respond to discipline. So you might eliminate that whole pool of very good candidates.
Jeremy,
I would
did you
imagine.
see there's a comment from Victoria?
Yep, I see that. I was about to get to it. Hi again. Hello, Victoria. How extensively were young people, middle and high school students, and recent grads, especially BIPOC young people, involved in this work thus far? My hope is that we can include their voices, experience, perspectives as much as possible. So, we were cognizant of that, and if you can see from the community, or the committee, there is a range and diversity of people. We have, I think, 3 people from the CRE, if I'm not mistaken. Dara, I'm going to point you out as the youngest person probably, and helped us average down. I was offended at one point when Vince said we were a bunch of old people. We try to make it as diverse as possible. And one of the officers, or Craig Davenport, is obviously a member, is BIPOC. We try to diversify it as best we could, and sampling from different people, different walks of life, and different backgrounds.
I'll just take the opportunity to plug our survey, which we have out right now, which you can find on the homepage of our website, mynewcastle.org. And thanks to Hermie and Charles and Kim Carey from the CRA for their work jumpstarting this survey. We will be taking all of the feedback that we get from the community in that survey and incorporating that as we think about how to move forward with these recommendations, as well as identifying areas for future investigation. As one of our recommendations is around continuing to do community surveys. So if we identify needs, we're definitely wanting to be responsive to that. So I would encourage people to take that survey as well. Jeremy, I also wanted to just note that I think there's one comment right before Victoria's that which we skipped over.
Pardon me. See Michael's. Yes, I apologize. Can you please speak a bit, Jennifer Lewis? Can you please speak a bit more about the proposal for community advocates and getting rid of anonymous complaints? Who specifically worked on that area?
I
Bill?
did. Yeah, sure. So the thought is that there is value to there is a value to assisting members of the community, or actually anyone who wants to file a complaint with the police department. It was we were envisioning a complaint against the police department. And so we appreciated the fact that there was, in fact, a value in an anonymous complaint. We wanted to encourage people who felt that they had been wrong to be able to step forward, but we also acknowledged the inadequacy of the system as it currently is. It doesn't allow us to do that follow-up that we need. We can't go back to the person to ask for additional information. So in many instances, these investigations stall. So you've got a complainant who didn't feel comfortable coming forward. They make an anonymous complaint. They don't see any results, and their feelings of being wronged are further compounded by the fact that there is no resolution, at least none that they can see. So it was envisioned that we would create a community advocate office. It would contain members of the BIPOC community, both male and female, members of the LGBTQ community, members of the interfaith community, and these liaisons would be identified on the website. And it would be someone who would, the potential complainant would be in a position to reach out to any of these people that they felt the most comfortable with, and allow that person to help walk them through the process of lodging a complaint against the police. They could act as their liaison. They would be able to protect their anonymity. We would also be in a position that we could get follow-up information and more information, let's say, was needed in order for us to do a full investigation. So that was the general idea behind it. We would do, there would be some disclaimers. It would be clear that this person, this advocate, is not their attorney. We want to make sure that, we're very clear about those lines. And we would do some very preliminary training with the advocates. And we were hopeful that this is something we could certainly do at the town level. And we'd be looking out to the community to for volunteers that would step up and help us launch the program.
And Jill, they still are anonymous, only just
Yes.
not to the advocate.
Right. And the advocate would absolutely preserve that anonymity. But again, so all the benefits of the anonymous complaint program, complaint abilities, but none of the detriments. So,
may I intrude?
Please.
I'd like to say, I wasn't clear that we were totally getting rid of the anonymous complaints. I was under the impression that we were working with a hybrid where they still have access to the anonymous complaint, but we were going to tout the benefits of using the ombudsperson or the community advocate.
Well, the hope is ultimately that sort of we should encourage Hermia, I think, to hopefully get the buy-in, if you will, to go that route, because it's just more efficient and more effective for both parties, both sides. To find
Absolutely. Yeah, but I think we probably need to revisit the idea of completely eradicating the anonymous complaints.
Well, I don't think anyone, and I shouldn't speak, but I don't think anyone objects to sort of phasing it to make sure that it's not just stripped away.
Right.
So,
okay, because the way the recommendation actually read was, the first part was eliminating the anonymous complaint, and instead creating this other position where the complainant remains anonymous to the police department, but has the ability to file anonymously through the advocate's office.
Right, I am now, and we can revisit that later, but I am now in deeper thoughts, recommending that we preserve the anonymous complaint.
And give an option for both?
Yes, yes. And we really promote the community advocates with the benefits. The police officer needs additional information. The person filing the complaint needs closure, etc.
But you're never gonna, the problem is that if
Well,
somebody files an anonymous complaint, you're never gonna get that opportunity
think
to
to
engage.
Hermie-
But it's their choice because they now have an option.
Oh, I see. I see what you're saying. So the first exposure would be through the advocate's office, and then the complainant could make a determination as to whether or not they want to pursue through the advocate's office, or if they would still prefer to pursue anonymous. I understand. I got it. Yes.
That seems very reasonable, and hopefully, again, when people see the effectiveness of one route as opposed to the other, there'll be a complete acceptance of just using.
Yeah, I have to modify the proposal as it stands. Thank you for that, Termian.
There's also another dynamic. I mean, this is all messy. If somebody wants to make a complaint, it's not so clean all the time. And I mean, I think somebody might start off as making an honest complaint, then experience the lack of resolution, and then go back and say, I think I want to go through the advocate now. So just allowing for the flexibility, I think, is a good idea.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Hermie.
I mean, I think the primary reason for us even having this position is really given the comfort level of the individuals who want to make these complaints, really kind of not only helping them make the complaint on an anonymous basis, and hopefully in time they're comfortable enough to be able to proceed with it in a non-anonymous way, but just it's really a transitional period too. I mean, the ultimate hope is that with all of these things in place, these members of the community will feel more comfortable and more understood and respected enough that they'll be able to in the future bring these complaints on their own. But I think it's important that we did have this hybrid, because that was my understanding as well, what Hermione mentioned.
Well, I believe, again, I hate to say I think we're all in agreement, but I believe we are, that makes sense to.
Yeah.
Is it this, I guess my thought is next week is our chance to reconvene and discuss these issues in depth.
Yeah.
And I think maybe that's where we should continue that.
And we encourage people to join again.
Next week, I think it's just us, and then the following week would be the community again.
Well, are we not public? We're public. We broadcast it in real time, do we not?
I think it's recorded.
It's recorded? It is recorded? Okay. I don't see any new questions below on the chat. I give people credit who run these things. It's not as easy as it seems. Sorry, Ivy. Yes, it's like looking up and down. Names are cut off.
I've been saying that for 5 form-based public hearings. Everybody has heard me say it's harder than it looks.
Oh, yeah. So is there anyone else that want to comment? You could certainly dial in, raise your hand, virtual hand, type a comment. And if you feel uncomfortable now, by all means, you can send it to us via email or contact us individually. And anyone from the panel have anything else they want to share?
I do actually. It's Joanna again. And I just wanted to thank Chief Carol, Ivy, and Jeremy for leading this board. And out of the blue today, we were shopping on Central Avenue in Yonkers, and we met with George Floyd's cousin. And I found it quite strange, actually, that I would bump into him today of all days. So I just wanted to put this in as a closing statement of mine and thank everyone from all the residents who attended this call as to what our original purpose for this group was. And I'm especially happy to see all the comments which came in for mental reform. So, that's all I just wanted to talk about. And once again, thanks to everyone who spent all their time on this panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanna. And there is a question from Neil Feiner to get some perspective. And Chief, I think you've actually answered this before. How many complaints, if you can recall, have been filed against the Newcastle Police Department in the past 5 years? or roughly?
Yeah, I do have it. Approximately 25. I'm mute? So no, I'm good. About approximately 25. And that's from internal and external sources. So
Internal meaning within the police department and external meaning the public.
correct.
And can you give an example if you have it ranging from, because when I hear complaints, is it because of excessive force or is there other issues?
I think in 10 years, we've had 2 excessive force complaints and they were based upon or during arrest. A lot of them are the officer was rude on a traffic stop. The officer wasn't on a traffic post, maybe in a timely fashion. The response time was longer than a community member had anticipated. We did have an officer though get arrested last year. So that was an internal one. But most of them are predominantly minor infractions.
Thank you, Chief. And to be clear, that arrest had nothing to do with the town of Newcastle, correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
I do want to add that one of the things that came up in our meeting was that the BIPOC community do not report incidents with the police or do not have a history of reporting incidents with the police. And that was a huge part of our discussion and also forming that community advocate position. So there are many who look to say that we have a perception of the police because or it's anecdotal because it's not reported. But there is a certain fear of retaliation, and that was the basis of the office of the community advocate.
And Chairman, I just found my notes. There were 20 complaints in a total of 20 complaints in the last 5 years.
Thank you both. Any other? Just a question. Are you allowed to share publicly disciplinary history? Is that something that's not is that internal? There's been a change. So disciplinary history was always part of an employee's personnel records, but as part of police reform, that was repealed. So it would be subject to FOIL, and there's so many restrictions that it's just not an easy thing to answer right now. And I would say, just as some people know who practice in the criminal law area, the reform and new discovery laws have drastically changed what is available, not necessarily to the general public in terms of just getting information, but certainly in a situation where there is an allegation and an arrest. You'll find many a prosecutor who's none too happy. You'll find many a defense attorney who wants the information. It's very helpful, but it can be voluminous. But that's a situation or conversation for a different day. Any other questions, or shall we, I don't want to rush anyone through, or should we say thank you and call it an evening? This will be a first that we end early. So I got a bunch of smiles there. So I wanted, wow, a lot of smiles. So thank you everyone for showing up. Most importantly, thank you, Tiffany, for putting it together. Thank you, Jill, for everything that you do. Thank you, everyone. And Chief, I would say you've been really a trooper, not a state trooper through all this, but a trooper through this, because it's not, I shouldn't be perceived as we're attacking the police department. We want the best for this community. We want the best for the police department. This is it's teamwork. It's a marriage of all of us. So thank you all. And I want to thank everybody, all these stakeholders. They worked very hard, and we had some spirited conversations, and they tested me and challenged me, and I think we're better off going forward. So thank you, everyone. Indeed. So we will see each other soon, and we're continuing working on this. So thank you very much for everyone for coming tonight.
Right. So for the committee, we're going to meet internally next week. I think we've got it scheduled for an hour to review the comments from tonight and make modifications. And then in 2 weeks, the 25th, somebody stop me. Is that right? I have to look back on our. Not give the wrong date.
It's definitely 25th because it's my birthday.
I wasn't going to say
that's
it. I was going to say somebody's birthday.
I think there was an error posted.
And we're going to have a virtual cake for Kimberly. The 25th will be our second public forum to discuss our recommendations. Okay.
Kimberly, a virtual cake. I'm going to eat it all. I don't have to work out afterwards. It's great.
Yeah, no calories.